where my heart goes.
Okay, let's talk about everyone's favorite supplement, caffeine. All right, caffeine is good to a degree, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So caffeine has lots of beneficial purposes, all right? So the first one is that it's going to enhance our central nervous system signaling, which means your brain is able to fire messages to your skeletal muscle at a quicker rate, all right? That is going to result in increased power, increased speed in athletes who need increased power and speed. It's also going to improve athletes' reaction time. So think of all the explosive athletes that need to do something quickly. Caffeine is going to help them, all right, do that. Also though, it extends glycogen stores. Now because it does have a slight diuretic effect, what that basically means is that when you use glycogen for energy, it will use less amounts of glycogen for the same amount of energy in the body, and therefore an aerobic athlete would take caffeine to delay the use of those stores, or basically extend the use of those stores, I should say, which therefore delays fatigue. The third benefit is that it delays our perception of fatigue, which is tied directly with this, decreasing our rate of perceived exertion, which is RPE, and you should remember that. So what that basically means is that, like right now, if I had to rate my tiredness on a level of 1 to 10, I'd say I'm sitting at about a 5, okay? I'm about a normal amount of tiredness that I would be in this amount of time of the day. However, if I go and have some caffeine, I might now say that my tiredness is a 4 out of 10, okay? Because I'm not as tired. Even though physically my body is just as tired, the caffeine affects my mental state and therefore it makes me feel like I'm not less tired, which is why people take it when they feel tired, because it makes them not feel tired anymore, all right? It's like Panadol. You take Panadol when you're sick, or when you take Panadol when you've got a pain, it takes away the sensation that you have a pain, but the pain is actually still there. You just don't feel it anymore. And that's what Panadol does. So sources of caffeine, you can get caffeine powder, you can get caffeine tablets, and then dietary sources would be things like coffee, tea, chocolate, Coke, etc. So caffeine is beneficial for both anaerobic, so strength and speed type athletes, and aerobic athletes because of the different things that caffeine does, all right? However, not everything is all sunshine and rainbows. Large doses of caffeine, all right, will increase, well, caffeine generally will increase anxiety and increase arousal. But large doses will overstimulate the athlete and therefore maybe pushing them outside their optimum level of arousal. So remember our inverted U theory? So if an athlete is already optimally aroused and then they have caffeine, that actually might tip them over. So therefore they're overstimulated and they'll start making mistakes and their performance will go down. The last thing I've got here for caffeine is that doctors have recommended that people are to limit their caffeine consumption to 500 milligrams a day maximum. So caffeine has been shown to actually improve health outcomes, so forget about performance, health outcomes, up to about 500 milligrams a day. At that point, it seems that the extra stress, the increased heart rate, all this kind of stuff will actually start to take a negative effect. The last thing I'll actually write up very quickly now is the recommended amount of caffeine that you should take pre-performance to get all this stuff. Oh, that's another thing I probably should mention. Common sense, but I assume a lot of stuff is common sense, but I've just been doing this a long time. Caffeine needs to be taken directly, like pre-performance, so like 30 minutes. So caffeine should be taken 30 minutes pre-performance to get the benefits, all right? You could take it immediately pre-performance, but then it's really not going to kick the benefits in till like 30 minutes into your activity. Alternatively, if you have it in the morning and your session is like a couple hours later, you're probably going to have lost all of the benefits of consuming caffeine, all right? So it is something that does need to be taken immediately pre-performance. Now, the other thing I was going to mention was the correct amount of caffeine to take, which is this. So the last thing there is that the recommended guideline for maximizing performance in caffeine is taking 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight for your performance. So my example there, a 70 kilo individual would take 210 milligrams of caffeine directly before their performance, or 30 minutes before their performance. And just so you know, a standard caffeine tablet, which you can just go buy from the chemist or even Woolies, has some either 100 or 200 milligrams of caffeine in it. So a 70 kilo person would probably just pop 1 caffeine tablet and they're good to go. Oh, side note, you don't need to know this for your answers, but just because someone's going to ask me, a coffee, for the record, has somewhere between like 60 and like 110 milligrams of caffeine, depending on whether it's a single shot, double shot, instant, espresso, all that kind of stuff. Oh, and actually it depends on the roast too, whether it's a dark roast, medium roast, or a light roast. But anyway, we're getting way off track there. Yeah, that's caffeine. So the last one we're going to talk about here is creatine, all right? So some of you may have heard about creatine being like a muscle building or a bodybuilding supplement. And to a degree, yes, it is very useful for those types of athletes. And I'll go through this and explain why. But it's not like steroids. You don't just take creatine and get jacked. It doesn't work that way. So creatine, very simply, it's going to enhance the body's ability to resynthesize creatine phosphate, CP, when using the ATP-PC system. So you should remember from the very first video in this unit that the ATP-PC system lasts somewhere between 6 and 12 seconds. It is only used for explosive efforts. And what's happening is that creatine phosphate, which is stored within the skeletal muscle, gets used up. And then over the course of, 3 to 5 minutes, that CP is then resynthesized, and then you can do that explosive effort again. Okay? So creatine phosphate, more likely by supplementing creatine, what you're actually doing is enabling more creatine to sit there, okay, for resynthesis. There we go. So therefore, it does not extend a single performance. So just as a side example, if I was Usain Bolt and I went for a sprint and I sprinted as hard as I could, and for some way I could put a switch on my body and I was only going to use my ATP-PC system for that sprint. And let's say that Usain Bolt could do that for 11.24 seconds. All right. And then after 11.24, he'd used up all the CP available in his body and he needed to rest between 3 and 5 minutes for resynthesis to occur. Usain Bolt then takes creatine, okay, for a month, 5 grams a day. He then does exactly the same sprint. Guess what? He can still only sprint for 11.24 seconds, okay? It does not extend a single effort. However, let's say the first time it took exactly 4.5 minutes for all of his CP stores to be resynthesized so he could sprint again. Now that he's been taking creatine, he can do it after 4 minutes. So it's reduced his recovery by 30 seconds, which is huge. Now, I'm not saying it is that beneficial, and I can't actually give you hard numbers because they haven't done those studies on how much it does improve recovery, but they do know that by consuming creatine, it does improve an athlete's immediate recovery for the ATP-PC system. So therefore, like I just said, it does improve repeat efforts. So the 2 common examples that I've got here is that like reps in weightlifting. So like if you're doing bicep curls, you do a curl and you put it down. Okay, in that very brief second, there's a little bit of rest there where CP will start to resynthesize, and you do another rep and resynthesize and do another rep. So it can actually extend a set of reps, but it won't improve like the length that you can do 1 rep. The most common example, which is why team sports people take it, is for explosive team and gameplay. So if you're a basketballer or you're a league player or a soccer player and you are in a position where you're doing lots of like sprinting and then resting and sprinting and resting and sprinting and resting. So if you are consuming creatine or supplementing creatine, you'll be able to basically do over the course of your 80 or 90 minute match more sprints because you are able to resynthesize CP faster in between those sprints, and therefore you can do more of them over an extended period of time. The recommendation for creatine, which has changed a lot over the years, but it's very simply 5 grams a day. All right. There is something called a creatine loading phase, which is basically where you take upwards of 30 grams a day every day for a week, and then you switch to 5 grams a day. So if you wanted to get the performance benefits immediately, you could do that. But it has generally been proven to be useless as long as you're taking 5 grams a day over a month period of time and then maintain that 5 grams a day. And the other thing is, if you consume too much creatine, actually you can cause yourself some health issues, which I'll get to down here. Second last point on creatine is that it has no benefit really for athletes that don't use the ATP-PC system. So if you're like primarily a lactic acid type athlete, or if you're primarily an aerobic type athlete, consuming creatine makes no sense. You're wasting money, but also you are actually risking the health issues, which is the last point here. So when you consume creatine, it is stored within skeletal muscle, and anything that gets stored in muscles needs water to go with it. So therefore, when you consume creatine, you've got to consume extra water at the same time, all right? If you don't consume extra water, or if you're doing a sport which you sweat a lot and therefore you dehydrate a lot and you need to drink more water anyway, athletes will therefore risk excess dehydration, which can lead to things like cramping and messed up signaling and all the things that come along with bad hydration if adequate water intake is not met. All right. So that's creatine supplementation, and overall that is the end of our video on supplementation. Thanks, bye.